The Unwritten Name, Chapter 1. The Echo of Silence, Morning. It arrived, quiet, too quiet. A silence that pressed in, heavy and thick, like the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through the lace curtains. 8 years. 8 years I had lived in this house, breathed its air, shared its silence with my mother. 8 years of hushed footsteps, of soft-boiled eggs and bitter medicines, of whispered reassurances in the long, dark nights. And now, just silence. The funeral had been a blur. Faces, fleeting. Sympathy, a polite murmur. Sarah, my older sister, a phantom. She flew in from Victoria, Canada, a whirlwind of polished grief and designer black. She hugged me, a brittle embrace, and spoke of closure. Closure. What did she know of closure? Her life was on the other side of a continent, untroubled by hospital beds and the slow, inevitable decline of a beloved parent. The reading of the will. That's when the silence truly broke. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A cold, legal whisper that echoed in the cavernous, suddenly unfamiliar living room. Mr. Henderson, mother's solicitor, cleared his throat. His voice, usually so steady, seemed to falter. And to my beloved daughter, Sarah Margaret Davies, of Victoria, British Columbia, I bequeath my entire estate, including the property located at 14 Elm Street, Boston, Massachusetts. My breath caught. Sarah Margaret Davies, not Evelyn Rose Peterson. My name. It wasn't there. Not even a mention. 8 years. 8 years of my life sacrificed. My career paused. My own dreams deferred. For this to be erased, unwritten. I felt a cold dread creep through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. Sarah, next to me, sat impassive, her gaze fixed on Mr. Henderson. A flicker, perhaps, in her eyes. Not surprise. Something else. A knowing? No, that was unfair. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice droning on, but the words were a jumble, a meaningless buzz in my ears. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a heat. I blinked, fighting back the sting. Not here, not now. I would not give them the satisfaction. Afterward, in the muted hum of polite condolences, Sarah approached me, her hand cool against my arm. Evie, I'm so sorry. I don't understand this. Her voice, even now, carried that faint, lilting Canadian accent, a world away from my clipped Boston tones. She looked genuinely perplexed, or was it just a very good act? Don't you? I managed, my voice a thin, reedy sound, barely audible. Because I certainly don't. She sighed, a slow release of air. Mother was complex. You know that. Complex. Yes, but this wasn't complexity. This was betrayal. This was a deliberate act of erasure. The following days were a blur of practicalities. Sarah, efficient and detached, handled the legal side. Calls to real estate agents, discussions about packing and shipping. She moved through Mother's house like a stranger, untouched by the echoes of a life lived within its walls, a life I had shared. I'll need to list the house, Evie, she said one afternoon, standing in the kitchen, her voice flat. It's too big for me, and I have my life in Canada. Of course, I said, my voice dangerously even. Where else would your life be? She didn't catch the sarcasm, or pretended not to. I'll give you time to find a place, a few weeks, a month, perhaps, a month. To disentangle 8 years of my existence from the very fabric of this home. My home. The home I had assumed would be mine. The home I had poured my heart and soul into preserving. She left, A week after the funeral, a hurried goodbye at Logan Airport, a promise to call, a promise I knew she wouldn't keep. And just like that, the house was mine. And yet, it wasn't. It belonged to her. The silence returned, deeper now, laced with a bitter sting of abandonment. Chapter 2. Dust and Secrets. The house felt like a tomb. Every object, every piece of furniture whispered of mother. Her scent, faint lavender and old paper, still clung to the air. I walked through the rooms, a ghost in my own life, touching things, tracing patterns in the dust. The porcelain shepherdess on the mantelpiece, a gift from father. The faded tapestry mother had painstakingly stitched. The worn armchair where she had spent her final months, a thin blanket draped over its back. My resentment simmered, a low, constant heat in my chest. Why? Why would she do this? After everything. The sleepless nights, the endless worry, the financial strain of her long illness. Was it a test? A final cruel joke? Or had she truly forgotten me? Erased me? One afternoon, driven by a restless energy I couldn't quell, I decided to tackle the attic. It was a place mother rarely visited, a repository of forgotten memories. Perhaps answers lay hidden there. A forgotten codicil? A letter? Anything. The attic air was thick with the smell of old wood and mothballs. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight piercing the grimy window. Trunks, boxes, covered furniture. A lifetime of accumulation. I started with the boxes closest to the entrance, haphazardly labeled. Christmas decorations, old linens. Then a large, unlabeled wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was heavy. I strained to open it, the rusty latch groaning in protest. Inside, neatly stacked, were photo albums. Black and white photographs, sepia-toned snapshots. A younger mother, vibrant and smiling. Father, handsome and strong. Childhood pictures of Sarah and me, gap-toothed grins and scraped knees. Beneath the albums, wrapped in a faded velvet cloth, was a smaller, more intriguing box. A sturdy oak box with a delicate silver clasp. Not locked. I opened it. Inside, neatly bundled with a silk ribbon, were letters. And a stack of small, leather-bound books. Diaries. My heart gave a jolt. Mother's diaries. She had always been meticulous about her privacy, even with me. I had never known she kept them. A tremor ran through my hands as I picked up the topmost book. The leather was smooth, worn from handling. The first page was dated in Mother's elegant, flowing script, June 12th, 1955. Years before I was born, before Sarah was born. My initial thought was to find proof of her disdain, her neglect, evidence that she had always favored Sarah, or simply forgotten me. A morbid curiosity propelled me. I opened the first diary, my gaze falling on the Luthing script. June 12th, 1955. Boston is stifling today. The heat presses down, heavy and unforgiving, just like the weight in my chest. He left, just like that, vanished into the humid air, leaving me with nothing but a promise and a gnawing fear. Oh, William, how could you? William? Who was William? Father's name was Richard. This was a different time, a different life. My mother. Before she was my mother, a secret life. I continued to read, mesmerized. The entries painted a picture of a young Margaret, vibrant, passionate, and terribly alone. She wrote of a whirlwind romance with a man named William, a musician, a drifter, a man who captivated her heart and then disappeared as quickly as he arrived, leaving her with a devastating secret, a child. The entries grew more desperate, more fearful. The shame. It will destroy us all. My parents would never understand. I have to find a way to protect us both. A child. Before Sarah, before me. My mother had another child? The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. My carefully constructed narrative of her life, of my life, began to crumble. This wasn't about me being unloved. This was something far, far deeper. Chapter 3. A name repeated. Days turned into weeks. I neglected everything else, consumed by the diaries. They were a window into a life I never knew. Margaret, young and vulnerable, struggling with an impossible choice. She wrote of hiding her pregnancy, of secret visits to a kind elderly nurse in a small town outside Boston. She wrote of pain, of fear, and of a heartbreaking decision. March 1st, 1956. She is beautiful, so small. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes. Her eyes wide and curious, just like his. I called her Sarah. My little Sarah. Oh, my heart breaks to let her go. But I must, for her sake, for mine. Mrs. Henderson says she will find a good family, a loving family, a family that can give her what I cannot. I pray she understands someday. I pray she knows I loved her. With every fiber of my being. My firstborn, my little Sarah. The name, Sarah. The same name as my sister. A wave of dizziness washed over me. Sarah. Not Sarah, my sister, but another Sarah. Mother's first daughter, my half-sister. This was the secret. The reason, the weight she carried. The reason for the name in the will. It wasn't my sister Sarah she had left the house to. It was this Sarah, the one she had given up. I reread the entries, searching for clues. For any detail that might lead me to this lost sister. The nurse, Mrs. Henderson, a small town. It was vague, but the emotion, the raw, searing grief in Mother's words was palpable. It permeated the pages, even after decades. I remembered Mrs. Henderson, the solicitor. Could there be a connection? I dismissed it. Too much of a coincidence. Then I found it, tucked between the pages of a later diary, a faded photograph, a small, formal portrait of a little girl, no older than 2 or 3, dark, serious eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible dimple in her left cheek, and a striking resemblance to a young Margaret, my mother. On the back, in faint, spidery script, was written, Sarah, 1958. My hands trembled as I held the photograph. This was her, my sister, the one Mother had mourned her whole life, the one whose absence had shaped her. I pulled out the box of letters again. They were mostly correspondences between Mother and various distant relatives. Old friends. But then, one envelope, thicker than the rest, stood out. It was addressed to Mother, but the return address was a post office box in a small town in upstate New York. And the sender's name was familiar. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson. The nurse. I opened the letter, my heart pounding. It was dated 1960. Mrs. Henderson, now retired, was writing to update Mother. She is a beautiful, thriving child, Margaret. Her adoptive parents are wonderful people, a professor and his wife. They adore her. They live in Syracuse now. They renamed her, of course, Sarah Elizabeth Miller. I have seen her a few times, at a distance, of course. You would be proud. She is thriving. I have kept your secret, as promised, and I always will. Sarah Elizabeth Miller, Syracuse. Names, a city, a last name. It was a thread, a fragile, ancient thread, but a thread nonetheless. And then, another letter from 1962. This one from Mother to Mrs. Henderson. A desperate plea. I need to know, Mrs. Henderson, just a glimpse. Is she happy? Is she well? The longing, it never fades. I named my second daughter after her, you know, Sarah. My Sarah, here with me, a constant reminder of the one I lost. I just want to know she's safe. That's all. My sister Sarah, my older sister, she was named after the lost sister. A living memorial, not a favorite, but a constant, quiet ache. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. The will, the house. It wasn't a slight against me. It was an act of hope, a beacon, a final desperate wish for her firstborn daughter to find her way home. Chapter 4. A Sister's Shadow. The bitterness began to recede, replaced by a profound sadness, and then a strange sense of purpose. I had to find her. This Sarah, this lost sister, not just for Mother's sake, but for my own. To understand, to heal. I contacted Sarah in Canada. My voice, usually tight with resentment, was now tinged with an urgency she couldn't ignore. Sarah, I began, without preamble. You need to come back. There's something I need to show you. She sounded wary. Evie, I told you. I'm busy, and the house. I've already put it on the market. Take it off the market, Sarah, I insisted, my voice firm. This is about Mother, and it's about us. A pause, then a hesitant, what are you talking about? Just come, I said, please. 2 days later, she was back, still impeccably dressed, still with that air of detached elegance. She looked at me, her brow furrowed. You look different. What's going on? I led her to the attic, the wooden trunk still open, the diaries and letters spread out on the dusty floorboards. I picked up the photograph of the little girl. This is Sarah, I said, my voice soft. Our half-sister, Mother's first child. She stared at the photograph, her mouth slightly agape. What? What are you talking about? I recounted the story, piecing together the narrative from the diaries, the letters, the secret pregnancy, the difficult decision, the adoption, the lifelong search, the naming of her, our Sarah, after the lost Sarah. As I spoke, I watched her face. The initial shock gave way to a dawning comprehension. Her eyes, so often guarded, softened. A single tear tracked a path down her cheek. Mother, she never said a word, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I always felt, I don't know, like she loved me, but with a sadness, a quiet sorrow. I thought I was a disappointment, or that she was just that way. But this, she touched the photograph with a trembling finger. This explains so much. The will, I said, pointing to the entries about the first Sarah. She wasn't leaving the house to you, Sarah. Not you specifically. She was leaving it to Sarah, to her first daughter. A hope, a prayer that if she ever found her, or if her daughter found her, she would have a home. Sarah sank onto a dusty old trunk, her shoulders slumping. All this time, she carried this, alone. Yes, I said, my voice gentle. And she tried. She searched. She just never found her. We sat in silence for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of Mother's past. The bitterness in my heart, the resentment that had festered for weeks, dissolved into something akin to understanding and compassion for Mother and for Sarah. who had also lived under the shadow of an unspoken truth. "So," Sarah said finally, looking up, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute, "we have to find her, don't we?" A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the lingering chill of betrayal. "Yes," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "We do." Chapter 5: Echoes and Connections. Our search began. It wasn't easy. Decades had passed. Records were scarce, privacy laws stricter. But armed with Mother's diaries, the faded photograph, and the name Sarah Elizabeth Miller, we started. We began with Syracuse. Old phone books, public records, ancestry websites. We found several Sarah Millers, but none matched the age or circumstances. It was a needle in a haystack. We hired a private investigator, a kindly, meticulous woman named Martha, who specialized in adoption searches. She was touched by our story, by the decades-long secret and Mother's poignant will. Martha's initial findings were discouraging. The Miller family had moved from Syracuse years ago. They were private people. She hit dead ends repeatedly. Sarah and I, now united in this quest, supported each other through the frustrations. Our old resentments faded, replaced by a shared purpose, a bond forged in the fires of a family secret. We talked for hours, late into the night, sharing memories of Mother, of our childhood, reevaluating everything in light of this new truth. "Do you think she'd even want to know?" Sarah asked one evening, her voice laced with doubt. "After all this time? Her life, her family, it might be an intrusion." "Maybe," I admitted, "but Mother wanted her to know. She left this house, this legacy, for her, and we owe it to Mother to try, and to her, to offer her a piece of her past if she wants it." A breakthrough came 6 months into our search. Martha called, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I found her," she announced. "Sarah Elizabeth Miller. She was adopted by Robert and Eleanor Miller. Robert was a professor at Syracuse University, as your mother's friend stated. They moved to Boulder, Colorado when Sarah was a teenager. She's now a retired librarian, and she lives in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon. So far away. Has she ever had any contact with adoption agencies?" I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. "Not that I can find," Martha replied. "She seems to have lived a quiet, unassuming life. Married, no children. Her husband passed away a few years ago." "How do we approach her?" Sarah asked. "This is huge, life-altering." "Carefully," Martha advised. "I found her address. I suggest a letter, a gentle introduction, explain everything, and offer her a choice." We spent days crafting the letter. We wanted it to be truthful, compassionate, and not overwhelming. We included a copy of the old photograph, a few excerpts from Mother's diaries about Sarah, and a copy of the relevant section of the will. We explained Mother's lifelong search, her love, and her final gesture. We also included our contact information. It felt like sending a message in a bottle across a vast ocean. We enclosed it in a large, plain envelope, typed the address to avoid any personal handwriting, and mailed it. Then we waited. The waiting was agony. Every day. I checked the mail. Every phone call made my heart leap. Chapter 6: The Unfolding Map. Weeks passed, no response. Sarah and I tried to be philosophical. Perhaps she didn't want contact. Perhaps the letter never reached her. Perhaps she dismissed it as a cruel hoax. Then, one rainy Tuesday, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, with a Portland, Oregon area code. My hand shook as I answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice, clear and calm, yet with an underlying tremor. "Is this Evelyn Peterson?" "Yes," I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "My name is Sarah Miller," she said. "I received your letter." Silence stretched, thick with unspoken emotions. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, on the other end of the line. "Thank you for sending it," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "It's a lot to take in. My parents, my adoptive parents, they told me I was adopted when I was young. They said my birth mother loved me very much but couldn't keep me. They never knew anything else. They respected her privacy and mine." "We understand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Mother never stopped loving you, not for a moment. She carried that loss with her every day." "The photograph," Sarah said, her voice catching. "And the diaries. It's uncanny. She looks so much like me when I was young. And the way she wrote about me, it's overwhelming." We talked for nearly an hour. She asked questions, hesitant at first, then more freely. About Mother, about our lives, about her, about the house. I told her everything I knew, everything I had learned from the diaries. I told her about Mother's hope that one day she would find her. "The house," she said, her voice trailing off. "She left it for me?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It was her greatest wish that you would have a home, if you ever needed one. A connection to her, if you chose to accept it." I don't know what to say," she murmured. "My life is here. But to know this, to know I was loved, it means more than words can say." She hesitated. "I'm a private person, but I think I'd like to meet you, both of you, if you're willing." A rush of relief, a flood of emotion washed over me. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with tears. "We are more than willing. We would love to meet you." Chapter 7. A new chapter. Sarah and I flew to Portland a few weeks later. The air buzzed with nervous anticipation. This was it, the culmination of Mother's secret, our search, and a lifetime of unanswered questions. We met at a quiet cafe nestled in a tree-lined street. Sarah Miller was a woman of quiet dignity, with kind eyes that held a deep well of emotion. She had Mother's dark, expressive eyes, and a hint of the same determined chin. Seeing her, it was like looking at a piece of Mother, a living echo. We spent hours talking, sharing stories, comparing lives. She told us about her adoptive parents, their love and support, her career as a librarian, a life filled with quiet contemplation and the joy of books. We shared anecdotes about Mother, about our childhood, filling in the blanks, building bridges between our separate worlds. "I always felt a piece of me was missing," Sarah told us, her voice soft. "A quiet curiosity about where I came from, who she was. And now, it's like a puzzle piece has finally clicked into place." We showed her more of Mother's diaries, entries that spoke of her overwhelming love, her regret, and her unending hope. We talked about the house, the legacy Mother had left. "I can't take the house," Sarah said gently. "My life is here, and it's your home, Evelyn. You spent years caring for Mother there. It belongs to you." "No," I said, looking at her, a profound sense of peace settling over me. "It belongs to all of us now. It's Mother's legacy to us, her way of bringing us together." My sister Sarah nodded in agreement. "We want you to have it, Sarah, or at least be a part of it. It was Mother's wish." We spent the rest of the day exploring Portland, talking, laughing. By the time we parted ways, a new connection had been forged. Not just blood, but shared understanding, empathy, and a burgeoning affection. Over the next few months, Sarah Miller visited Boston. She walked through the old house, the house that had been meant for her, the house imbued with her birth mother's longing. She touched the familiar objects, the same ones I had lived with, but now they held a new significance. She felt the echoes of Margaret's life, a life inextricably linked to her own. The house no longer felt like a symbol of betrayal. It felt like a home, a sanctuary, a place where a decades-old secret had finally come to light, bringing three women together. Sarah Miller decided not to take ownership of the house. Instead, she suggested something else. "Let's keep it in the family," she proposed. "All of us. A place where we can connect. A legacy from Mother's unspoken love. A testament to a life lived with a secret hope." And so we established a trust. The house became a shared property, a symbol of our newly united family. I continued to live there, still the primary caretaker, but now with a lightness in my heart, a profound sense of belonging. Sarah, my sister, frequently visited, her Canadian accent now a comforting sound, her presence a source of shared history and understanding. And Sarah Miller, our long-lost sister, came when she could, her visits filled with quiet joy and the unfolding of a new, unexpected relationship. The unwritten name in the will. It was never a slight. It was a beacon, a mother's desperate, enduring love finally finding its way home. The resentment, the bitterness, the pain of being forgotten, all of it faded, replaced by the profound truth of a mother's lifelong secret and the unexpected gift of new family. The house on Elm Street, once a source of discord, now stood as a testament to forgiveness, to enduring love, and to the beautiful, complicated tapestry of family. And the silence in the house, once heavy and isolating, was now filled with the gentle hum of connection, understanding, and the quiet promise of new beginnings.